The sun beat down on Fort Bragg with the relentless intensity that only North Carolina in August could deliver. Heat waves shimmered above the concrete, distorting the horizon where the Special Forces training compound met the tree line. The distinctive crack of high-caliber rifles echoed across the firing range, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter and the gruff commands of Sergeant Rivera. "Mitchell, that's another miss. 2 inches left. Compensate for the crosswind." Rivera stalked behind his Delta Force team as they lay prone on the firing line, their Barrett M82A1 rifles trained on targets positioned at varying distances across the valley. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he checked his watch. The men had been at it for 3 hours, and frustration hung in the air, as thick as the humidity. None of them noticed the solitary figure who approached from the eastern checkpoint. Edwin Harmon walked with deliberate purpose, each step measured despite the slight hitch in his gait. At 87 years old, his frame remained surprisingly upright, shoulders squared by decades of military bearing that not even age could erase. His weathered face bore the marks of countless days under harsh suns, deep lines etching a map of experience around eyes so pale blue they appeared almost colorless in the brightness of midday. The white bandage visible beneath his light blue shirt stood in stark contrast to his sun-browned skin. Blood had begun to seep through a small crimson bloom spreading across his right shoulder. He wore tan khakis and a light jacket. Despite the heat, the collar turned up against the sun rather than the cold. As he moved, his gaze continually swept the perimeter. Exits, threats, high ground, cover positions. The automatic assessment fired through neural pathways forged by decades of combat experience. His right hand occasionally brushed against an old metal Zippo lighter clipped to his belt, a talisman bearing the faded insignia of a unit that officially never existed. Private Williams spotted him first, the youngest member of the Delta team, barely 23, and fresh off his first deployment. "Sir," Williams called to Rivera, nodding toward the approaching figure. "We've got company." Rivera turned, squinting against the sun. His expression shifted from curiosity to annoyance in an instant. "Hey, old-timer!" he shouted, voice carrying across the range. "Medical wing is that way? This is a tactical zone." Several of the Delta operators laughed, their attention momentarily diverted from their frustrating training session. Harmon gave no indication he'd heard the mockery, continuing his steady approach toward what appeared to be a random spot along the range's perimeter. Captain Marcus Stone paused in adjusting his rifle's scope, catching sight of the old man's movement pattern. Something about it triggered a response in his brain, a recognition that preceded conscious thought. The fluid economy of motion, the constant awareness, the way the man positioned himself relative to cover and sight lines. Stone watched as the elderly visitor reached what any experienced operator would recognize as the optimal observation point overlooking the entire range. A position only his unit knew existed, offering perfect views of all firing angles while remaining sheltered from crosswinds. The old man leaned against the concrete barrier with a stance so perfect it looked casual. Weight distribution, optimized sight lines, clear escape routes mapped. Every angle calculated for maximum tactical advantage. Ice replaced the blood in Stone's veins. "Wait," he stood, leaving his beloved rifle propped against the sandbags. Something about the positioning, about the precise way this elderly civilian had found the exact spot that had taken Stone's team months to identify as optimal. The old man had turned, slightly adjusting his position to minimize exposure to the sun while maintaining visual coverage of the entire range. Stone approached slowly, studying the stranger. There was something hauntingly familiar about the set of his shoulders, about the watchful stillness in his posture. A recognition that clawed at the edges of his memory. "Sir," Stone said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Do I know you?" The old man turned, finally looking directly at him across 30 feet of packed dirt and 3 years of carefully maintained lies. "Took you long enough to recognize your own spotter, Stone." The world tilted sideways. Marcus Stone's carefully ordered universe, built on certainties like sunrise gravity and the immutable fact that Edwin Harmon had died in Fallujah, suddenly cracked down the middle like bulletproof glass under sniper fire. Private Williams, cleaning his M4 nearby, glanced up at the sudden silence that had fallen over the range. The easy mockery died in throats as Delta operators registered the shell-shocked expression spreading across their captain's face. "Sir," Rivera stepped closer, voice losing its casual cruelty. "You know this guy?" Marcus couldn't answer. His mouth worked soundlessly as neural pathways fired and misfired, trying to reconcile impossible data. The man standing before him wore civilian clothes, moved with the slight hesitation of age, bled real blood from a very real injury. But his stance, his positioning, the way he dissected their entire tactical setup in seconds. "You're supposed to be dead." Marcus finally managed the words emerging strangled, barely audible. Harmon's lips curved in something that might have been a smile, if ice could learn to express amusement. "Death is remarkably subjective, Marcus. Depends entirely on who's writing the report." The desert wind picked up, carrying traces of cordite and gun oil across the range. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors provided steady percussion against the tension stretching between them. Medic Johnson approached from the support tent, drawn by curiosity and professional concern at the sight of blood seeping through the old man's bandage. "Sir, that shoulder needs immediate attention. I can escort you to medical." "Negative." Harmon's response cut cleanly through the offer. "Wound is stable." Johnson blinked, caught off guard by military terminology, delivered with quiet authority. "Sir, with respect, you're bleeding through the bandage. That suggests field dressing applied under fire, sealed with coagulant, and stabilized for transport." Harmon adjusted the bandage with one-hand movement, speaking of medical training far beyond basic first aid. "I'm fine." The medic stepped back, suddenly uncertain. Civilian contractors didn't speak in tactical medical terminology. They didn't assess their own wounds with clinical precision that suggested extensive trauma experience. "Who is this guy?" Rivera muttered to Stone, who stood frozen still, processing the impossible presence before him. Before Marcus could respond, Colonel Montgomery emerged from the command tent, drawn by reports of an unauthorized civilian in the tactical zone. At 55, he carried himself with the rigid bearing of a career officer who'd climbed ranks through political maneuvering rather than battlefield competence. His face darkened when he spotted Harmon. "Sergeant Rivera, I ordered all non-essential personnel removed from this area during live fire exercises." Montgomery's voice carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to immediate compliance. "Working on it, sir." Rivera's voice carried less conviction than usual. Something about the way the old man stood there, absorbing their hostility without flinching, accepting their assumptions without protest, had begun to unsettle him. "Sir," Montgomery approached Harmon with bureaucratic authority wrapped around underlying nervousness. "This is a restricted military zone. You need to return to the visitor center for proper escort." Harmon regarded him with those pale blue eyes for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to catalog his rank, assess his competence, and categorize him as a non-threat. "Of course, Colonel," he replied with perfect military courtesy, but he didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket, a movement so smooth it appeared casual, and withdrew a compass. Not the plastic tourist variety, but a military-grade instrument with precision markings that caught sunlight like polished steel. Marcus felt his heart skip. That wasn't standard issue. That was specialized equipment for long-range reconnaissance and precision targeting. "You lost or something?" Rivera tried to reclaim momentum through mockery. "Need GPS coordinates to find the medical tent." Harmon studied the compass, faced with concentration that suggested he was reading far more than magnetic north. His lips moved silently, calculating, measuring timing. When he looked up, his gaze swept the horizon in a pattern Marcus recognized from advanced reconnaissance training. "Actually," he said quietly, "I'm exactly where I need to be." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the August sun. Even Private Williams, usually oblivious to subtext, sensed something shifting in the air. He set down his weapon and moved closer, drawn by instincts he couldn't name. Marcus forced himself to move, approaching Harmon with steps that felt like walking through quicksand. Each meter closed between them brought back memories he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. The last time he'd seen that profile, they'd been in the dust and chaos of Fallujah. The building collapsing around them, the explosion that lit up the night sky, and afterward, in the haze of evacuation, the devastating news that his spotter, his partner, the man who'd taught him everything about long-distance killing, had been lost. "Excuse me, sir." His voice cracked on the words. "I need to ask, have we met before?" Harmon turned to face him fully. For the first time since his arrival, he gave Marcus his complete attention. Marcus felt the weight of that gaze like physical pressure, measuring, evaluating, deciding how much truth he could handle. "We've met," he said simply. The admission hit the assembled group like a grenade with the pin pulled. Rivera straightened, suddenly interested. Montgomery stepped closer, bureaucratic radar, pinging danger. Williams reached unconsciously for his sidearm. "When?" Marcus pressed. "Where?" "Does it matter?" Harmon's deflection came wrapped in silk, but Marcus heard steel underneath. "You clearly don't remember." "I remember everything." The words came out harsher than intended. Every mission, every firefight, every face. So if we've met, then maybe... Your memories aren't as reliable as you think, Harmon interrupted gently. Marcus' encrypted, tactical smartphone buzzed against his hip. The device featuring advanced satellite communication capabilities, originally developed for special operations in hostile territories. He ignored it too focused on the impossible man standing before him to notice how his heart rate had spiked into dangerous territory. Run him, Prince, Montgomery ordered Rivera quietly. Full background check. Something's not right here. Rivera nodded, but his usual enthusiasm for harassment had dampened. The old man's calm acceptance of their hostility felt wrong somehow, like he was playing a game whose rules they didn't understand. Sir, Private Williams spoke up, surprising everyone. If you're hurt, we should help. Whatever else is going on, that's just being human. Harmon looked at him with something that might have been approval. Thank you, Private, but I don't need help. Everyone needs help sometimes. Williams persisted with the earnest conviction of youth. Nothing wrong with accepting it. Some people, Harmon said softly, learn to help themselves. He paused, eyes distant for a moment. Others learn that depending on people gets you killed. The words carried weight that pressed against the assembled group like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Marcus felt recognition tickling the edges of his consciousness. Not just the face, but the voice, the mannerisms, the way he spoke in careful truths that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. Johnson, Montgomery snapped, escort this man to medical. Full evaluation. I want documentation on how he got here, who authorized his presence, and why he's wandering around my base like he owns it. Sir, Johnson stepped forward reluctantly. Sir, if you'll come with me. Harmon looked at the medic with patient amusement. You're going to force a wounded man to medical against his will. For your own safety, sir, Johnson replied, uncomfortable with the situation but following orders. My safety. Harmon glanced around the group, taking in Rivera's aggressive posturing, Montgomery's bureaucratic paranoia, Marcus's growing confusion. Which one of you exactly is concerned about my safety? The question hung in the desert air like smoke, because the honest answer was none of them. They were concerned about protocol, about unauthorized personnel, about maintaining the illusion of control. His actual well-being had never entered the equation. William stepped forward again. I am. The simple declaration cut through layers of military hierarchy and masculine posturing. A 23-year-old private from Nebraska who had joined the Army to pay for college and found himself in the middle of elite operations he barely understood, offering genuine human concern to a stranger. Harmon studied him for a long moment. What's your name? Private Williams, sir. James Williams. Well, James Williams. Harmon's smile transformed his face, revealing warmth that had been carefully hidden behind tactical assessment. I appreciate your concern, but I promise you I'm exactly where I need to be. Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his brain, fragments of memory that refused to form a complete picture. The way he said certain words, the slight accent that surfaced when he relaxed the unconscious military bearing that contradicted his civilian clothes. A flash of memory hit Marcus with physical force. Desert heat, the scent of gun oil and sweat. Iraq 991, Operation Sandstorm. He'd been a fresh-faced private, then assigned to his first long-range reconnaissance mission. His spotter had been a legend even then, a man who could read wind currents by watching heat mirages and calculate bullet drop as easily as most people calculated tips. Eagle, the nickname escaped Marcus' lips before he could stop it. Harmon's eyes sharpened and focus intensifying as he heard the call sign that had been buried in classified mission reports for decades. Before either could speak, Analyst Carter emerged from the communications tent, tablet in hand, an expression troubled. Database search complete, sir, he reported to Montgomery. Partial match on facial recognition, but this is weird. Montgomery snatched the tablet, impatient for information that might restore order to his disrupted operation. What kind of partial match? System shows Edwin Harmon, age 87, Special Operations Forces. Carter hesitated. But sir, according to these records, he's been KIA for 3 years. Died in Fallujah, November 12, 2019. The tablet might as well have exploded for the effect it had on the group. Marcus staggered backward like he'd been shot. Rivera's mockery died completely. Montgomery stared at the screen as if the pixels might rearrange themselves into sense. That's impossible, Montgomery said finally. Dead people don't walk into military bases. Dead people, Harmon observed quietly, don't usually have much choice in where they walk. Marcus' legs gave out. He sat down hard on an ammunition crate, staring at Harmon like he'd materialized from smoke. You died. I read the report. Explosion took out the entire building. No survivors. Reports, Harmon said gently, aren't always accurate. But I saw Marcus stop memory hitting him like a sledgehammer. The last mission, the building collapse, the explosion that lit up the Fallujah skyline. And afterward, in the chaos of evacuation, the devastating news that his spotter, his partner, had been lost. You saw what they needed you to see, Harmon said. Believed what they needed you to believe. Rivera found his voice first. This is insane. You're claiming to be some dead special ops soldier. Prove it. Harmon regarded him with those ice blue eyes. What would constitute proof for you, Sergeant? I don't know. Do something special opsy. Show us some secret squirrel stuff. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the base continued its daily operations. Helicopters landing and taking off, personnel moving between buildings, the constant background hum of military efficiency. But in their small circle, everything had gone silent. Harmon reached for his pocket again, this time withdrawing what looked like a standard field notebook. He flipped it open to a specific page and read aloud. Operation Sandstorm, November 8, 1991. Sniper Team Alpha 7. Target High Value Asset Compound 17. Range 820 meters. Wind speed 12 knots from southeast. Marcus Stone, primary shooter. Confirmed kill 0430 hours. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Those details weren't in any official report. They existed only in classified debriefings that required security clearance levels beyond most personnel's access. How do you know that? His voice came out as a whisper. Because I was there. Harmon closed the notebook. I was the one who calculated wind drift. I was the one who confirmed the target. I was the one who called the shot. Rivera stepped back involuntarily. That's classified information. You could go to prison just for knowing it. Hard to imprison a dead man, Harmon pointed out. Montgomery was scrolling frantically through the tablet, cross-referencing files and databases. This doesn't make sense. If you're alive, where have you been? Why the fake death? What happened in Fallujah? Harmon's expression closed off like shutters slamming down. Some questions have answers you're not cleared to hear. I'm a colonel in the United States Army, and I'm a ghost colonel. We operate by different rules. The word ghost sent electricity through the group. In special operations circles, ghosts referred to operatives so deep undercover, they'd been officially declared dead. Urban legends whispered about in briefings but never confirmed. Marcus struggled to process the implications. If Harmon was alive, if he'd been operational for 3 years, why surface now, he asked. Why here? Harmon looked at him with something that might have been sadness. Because Marcus, some missions require you to come back from the dead. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring across the base. Not the scheduled drill alerts, but the harsh, urgent klaxons that meant immediate danger. Personnel scattered toward defensive positions as loudspeakers crackled to life. Unauthorized drones inbound. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The transformation was instantaneous. Montgomery barked orders into his radio. Rivera and his team sprinted toward mounted weapons. Johnson began setting up a field medical station. The organized calm of base operations dissolved into controlled chaos. Only Harmon remained motionless, his ice blue eyes tracking the horizon with predatory focus. Sir, you need to get to the bunker, Williams shouted over the alarm. Civilians aren't supposed to be in the open during attacks. Harmon didn't respond. He was listening to something the others couldn't hear. Processing data through senses honed by years of combat, Marcus noticed his stillness and felt familiar recognition. He'd seen that exact posture before, the way Harmon became a statue when processing threats, calculating responses, preparing for violence. 3 drones, he said quietly, modified for surveillance but carrying payloads. Approaching from the northeast at approximately 150 meters altitude, Rivera whirled around. How the hell can you possibly know that? Instead of answering, Harmon moved toward the weapons rack with fluid precision. He bypassed the standard M4s and reached directly for Marcus's Barrett M82 sniper rifle that required extensive training to operate effectively. Whoa! Marcus lunged forward. That's my weapon. You can't just... Harmon's hands moved across the rifle with intimate familiarity. He checked the chamber, tested the scope alignment, and assessed ammunition and movements so smooth they looked choreographed. Every gesture spoke of thousands of hours of training, muscle memory, burned so deep it operated beyond conscious thought. 50 caliber modified trigger group, custom scope, calibrated for extreme range. He murmured more to himself than anyone else. You always did prefer your equipment precise. Marcus stopped reaching for his rifle. Only someone who'd worked extensively with Barrett systems would recognize those specific modifications. Only someone with advanced training would handle the weapon with such casual expertise. Permission to engage, Harmon asked, not looking away from the scope. The question cut through base protocols like a blade. Engaging enemy aircraft required authorization from command proper identification rules of engagement review. It wasn't something a wounded civilian in street clothes should even consider. But the drones were visible now, dark specks against blue sky growing larger as they approached the base perimeter. System malfunction, someone shouted from the radar station. Targeting computers are down, electronic warfare package in effect. The base's sophisticated air defense systems designed to handle exactly this type of threat flickered and died. Screens went dark. Targeting radar spun uselessly. In seconds, their technological advantage had been neutralized. Harmon settled into shooting position behind the Barrett, with movements so fluid they looked like dance. His wounded shoulder never wavered. His breathing fell into the deep, controlled rhythm that separated amateur shooters from professionals. "Sir, you need authorization," Montgomery began. "Sir," Marcus interrupted, watching Harmon's setup with growing awe. "I don't think he's requesting permission. I think he's being polite." The first drone swept across the base perimeter, electronic signature, jamming communications and targeting systems. Its payload bay opened, revealing instrumentation that could be surveillance gear or something far more dangerous. Harmon fired. The sound of the Barrett's discharge rolled across the desert like thunder. 800 meters away, the drone exploded in a burst of metal and electronics, raining debris onto empty sand. Harmon worked the bolt with mechanical precision, ejected the spent casing, and chambered a fresh round in less than 2 seconds. The second drone attempting evasive maneuvers received the same treatment. Metal fragments scattered across the base perimeter. The third drone climbed rapidly, trying to gain altitude advantage while maintaining electronic warfare capabilities. Harmon tracked its movement through the scope, calculating lead time, wind drift, and target velocity with supernatural accuracy. His third shot brought it down in a controlled fall that scattered wreckage safely away from base structures. Total engagement time, 47 seconds. 3 targets, 3 kills, 0 collateral damage. The sudden silence felt deafening after the rifle's thunderous voice. Slowly, personnel emerged from defensive positions, staring at the debris field scattered beyond the base perimeter. "Holy," someone whispered. Harmon safed the weapon and stepped back, offering the Barrett to Marcus with the same casual gesture someone might use to return a borrowed pen. "Your rifle, Captain. You might want to clean the chamber. I fired it dirty." Marcus accepted his weapon with hands that trembled slightly. The metal was still warm from discharge, the scope still perfectly zeroed despite the rapid engagement. Everything exactly as he'd left it, except for the miracle of 3 impossible shots. "How?" The question came out barely audible. "Practice," Harmon said simply. Montgomery was screaming into his radio, demanding explanations from command. Rivera stared at the debris fields like he was seeing UFO crash sites. Even Johnson had abandoned his medical preparations to gape at the man who just performed what should have been impossible. But Marcus couldn't look away from Harmon's face because in the aftermath of combat, his careful mask had slipped for just a moment. And in that instant, he saw past 3 years of carefully maintained lies to the truth underneath. He wasn't just someone who resembled his dead partner. He wasn't a convenient look-alike with military training and intimate knowledge of classified operations. He was exactly who he'd claimed to be. Edwin Harmon, his spotter, his partner, the man who died saving his life in Fallujah 3 years ago, standing right in front of him, very much alive, and apparently very much still operational. "System restore complete," Analyst Carter called from the communications tent. "Electronic warfare package has been neutralized. All systems back online." Montgomery whirled around. What changed? "Best guess the source of the jamming was destroyed." Carter gestured toward the debris fields. "Whatever those drones were carrying, it's not jamming us anymore." The implications slowly penetrated the group's shock. The electronic warfare attack had been coordinated with the drone assault. Someone had tried to blind the base before striking, and Harmon had not only identified the threat, but neutralized it with 3 shots that shouldn't have been possible. "Run full ballistics analysis," Montgomery ordered. "I want to know exactly what happened here." "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "I can tell you exactly what happened. Someone who knows how to shoot just saved our base." Rivera found his voice. "He's not military. Look at him. Wounded civilian in street clothes. He can't possibly—" "Can't possibly what?" Harmon interrupted gently. "Defend myself, defend others, or can't possibly be who I claim to be." The questions hung in the desert air like smoke from the burning drones. Base personnel were returning to normal operations, but nothing felt normal anymore. The careful order of military hierarchy had been shattered by 47 seconds of impossible accuracy. Private Williams approached cautiously. "Sir, are you okay? They're shooting with your injury?" Harmon smiled at him with genuine warmth. "I'm fine, James. Thank you for asking." "How did you know about the electronic warfare package?" Carter asked from across the range. "That intelligence wasn't in any briefing." "Some things," Harmon said carefully, "you learn by experience rather than briefing." Marcus was studying him with new intensity, pieces of memory clicking together like rifle parts being assembled. The last mission, Fallujah. "You said you had intelligence about electronic warfare capabilities." "I thought it was analyst speculation." "It wasn't speculation," Harmon replied, "but the source was classified. You never told me where the intelligence came from." Harmon's expression became unreadable. "Some sources are classified beyond traditional clearance levels." Montgomery stepped forward, tablet in hand and face flushed with bureaucratic frustration. "Sir, I need answers, official answers. If you're military personnel, I need your unit, your commanding officer, your authorization to be here. And if I'm not military personnel," Harmon pointed out mildly, "then you just committed multiple felonies by discharging military weapons without authorization." "It's not a dilemma. It's a straightforward legal issue." "Colonel," Marcus intervened, "maybe we should focus on the fact that he just saved the base instead of worrying about paperwork." "The paperwork exists for a reason: captain, chain of command, proper authorization, rules of engagement. These things matter." "They matter," Harmon agreed, "but they matter less than keeping people alive." The simple statement carried weight that pressed against the group like gravity. Because whatever paperwork violations might have occurred, the alternative was 3 drones delivering unknown payloads to a base full of personnel. Rivera was examining the debris field through binoculars. "Clean kills, no secondary explosions. No chemical traces. Looks like surveillance packages, not weapons." "Surveillance is a weapon," Harmon said quietly. "Information kills more people than bullets." Marcus felt another piece click into place. "The Fallujah mission, the intelligence you provided. It wasn't from satellite feeds or signal intercepts, was it?" Harmon didn't answer directly. "What do you think, Marcus?" "I think," he said slowly, "you were already operating in deep cover 3 years ago. I think the explosion that supposedly killed you was an extraction under fire. And I think you've been operational ever since." "That's quite a theory." "Is it true?" Harmon looked at him for a long moment, weighing his response. "Truth is often less important than perception." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you are cleared to receive." Montgomery threw up his hands in frustration. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling command. Full investigation, complete background check, and official answers to official questions." "Of course," Harmon said agreeably, "though you might want to be careful about which questions you ask." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Some questions," Harmon said gently, "have answers that change everything you think you know about your mission here." The afternoon sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the base. Personnel moved between buildings with the steady efficiency of military routine, but whispered conversations followed Harmon's passage. Word was spreading about the man who'd materialized from nowhere and performed impossible shots. Marcus walked beside him as Harmon moved toward the helicopter landing zone, trying to process 3 years of grief and guilt being overturned in the space of an hour. "Where have you been?" he asked quietly. "Around." "That's not an answer." "It's the best answer I can give you." They walked in silence for several steps, boots crunching on desert sand. Marcus wanted to ask 1,000 questions about the mission, about his survival, about why he'd let him believe he was dead. But he sensed that direct questions would only produce more deflections. "The guilt," he said finally. 3 years of thinking I should have saved you. Should have pulled you out before the building came down. Should have been faster, smarter, better." Harmon stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time since his arrival, his expression showed something beyond tactical assessment or careful neutrality. "Marcus." His voice was gentler than Marcus had heard it since Fallujah. "That guilt was never yours to carry. You were my responsibility, my partner." "And you were mine," Marcus countered, "which is why I should have made sure you got out alive." "Which is why I made sure you got out alive," Harmon corrected softly. The admission hung between them like a bridge across 3 years of pain. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotions he'd spent years suppressing. "I grieved for you," he said simply. "I know. I blamed myself. I know that too." "Why?" The question came out more desperate than he'd intended. "Why let me think you were dead? Why put me through that?" Harmon was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with those ice-blue eyes. Because Marcus, sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them think they've lost you. Before he could respond, Montgomery's voice cut across the distance between them. Sir, I need you to return to the command post immediately. Harmon glanced toward the colonel, then back at Marcus. Some conversations will have to wait. Will there be a later? Marcus asked. Or are you going to disappear again? She smiled. And for just a moment, Marcus saw past the operative to the man he had known in Fallujah. I'm not done here yet. As they returned to the command area, Marcus noticed details he'd missed during the initial chaos. The way Harmon moved through the base with perfect navigation despite claiming to be a visitor. The way he positioned himself to maintain optimal sightlines while appearing casual. The way his gaze continuously swept for threats even while engaged in conversation. These weren't skills someone learned from training manuals. They were instincts burned into neural pathways through years of operational experience. Montgomery was waiting with reinforcements, a full complement of military police, and 2 officers Marcus didn't recognize. Official investigation mode complete with formal, protocol, and documented procedures. Sir, Montgomery began formally. I need to inform you that you're being detained for questioning regarding multiple security violations. Harmon regarded the assembled personnel with mild interest. Am I under arrest, Colonel? You're being held for investigation. On what charges? Montgomery consulted a prepared list. Unauthorized access to a military installation, improper handling of military weapons, discharge of firearms without proper authorization, and possible violations of classification protocols. Interesting. Harmon seemed genuinely curious about the charges. How do you plan to prosecute someone who doesn't officially exist? The question hit the investigation like a wrench in machinery. Because if Edwin Harmon was officially dead, if his identity was classified beyond normal military channels, then standard legal procedures might not apply. We'll figure that out, Montgomery said with less confidence than before. I'm sure you will. Harmon's agreement carried undertones that suggested he found the entire situation amusing. Though you might want to check with your superiors before proceeding too far down this path. My superiors? The ones who authorized my presence here. Montgomery frowned. No one authorized your presence. You arrived as a wounded civilian. Did I? Harmon tilted his head slightly. Are you certain about that? Before Montgomery could respond, Carter emerged from the communications tent with an expression of confused urgency. Sir, I'm getting some very strange calls from command. They want to speak with you immediately. Something about operational security and classified personnel. The color drained from Montgomery's face. In military hierarchies, urgent calls from command rarely brought good news for local commanders. What kind of classified personnel? He asked. Carter glanced at Harmon, then back at his colonel. The kind that don't appear on standard rosters, sir. The implications slowly penetrated Montgomery's bureaucratic confidence. If Harmon was operating under classification levels beyond his clearance, then detaining him could be a career-ending mistake. Sir, he said carefully to Harmon, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Perhaps we should, Harmon agreed. As they moved toward the command post, Marcus found himself walking beside Rivera, who was uncharacteristically quiet. You buying any of this? Rivera asked quietly. Marcus considered the question, looking at the old man who just turned their world upside down with 3 impossible shots. 3 shots against moving targets at 800 meters. Electronic warfare countermeasures. Classified intelligence. Deep cover operations. He paused. Yeah, I'm buying it. But he's supposed to be dead. Marcus watched as Harmon disappeared into the command post, remembering his final words. Maybe death is more flexible than we thought. Inside the command post, monitors flickered with tactical displays and communication feeds. The air conditioning hummed against the desert heat, creating an artificial calm that contrasted with the tension filling the room. Colonel Montgomery stood with a secure phone pressed to his ear, his expression morphing from confusion to concern to something approaching fear. Yes, sir, I understand. Full cooperation, no questions. He hung up and turned to face Harmon, who sat calmly at the briefing table as if he'd been there 1,000 times before. Perhaps he had. Sir, Montgomery said, his tone dramatically altered from minutes earlier. I've been instructed to provide you with any assistance you require. That's very kind, Harmon replied. I don't require assistance. Then what do you require? Harmon looked out of the window toward the helicopter landing zone where aircraft stood ready for deployment. I require you to forget I was ever here. Montgomery blinked, caught off guard by the request. Sir, that's not possible. We have witnesses' recordings, incident reports, all of which can be modified, Harmon interrupted gently. Official records will show that 3 drones were destroyed by base defense systems during an electronic warfare attack. No mention of individual personnel, no unusual incidents, no investigation required. But the ballistics evidence will show that the Barrett M82 assigned to Captain Stone fired 3 rounds during the engagement. Nothing unusual about a sniper using his weapon to defend his base. Marcus, standing silently by the door, felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. Harmon wasn't just erasing his presence. He was maintaining operational security at levels beyond normal military protocols. "What about us?" Rivera asked from across the room. "We're supposed to just forget this happened." Harmon looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Sergeant, do you really want to be the person who files a report claiming that a dead man saved the base?" The question highlighted the impossible position they were in. Report the truth and face questions about their mental stability. Report fiction and commit official fraud. Or report nothing and pretend the most significant event of their deployment never occurred. "This is insane," Rivera muttered. "This is operational security," Harmon corrected gently. "Sometimes the most important victories are the ones nobody can talk about." Private Williams had been silent through most of the discussion, but now he stepped forward with the earnest conviction that made him both admirable and dangerous. "Sir, I just want to say thank you for protecting us, for doing what needed to be done." Harmon smiled at him with genuine warmth. "You're welcome, James. But remember, this never happened." "How can I forget something like this?" "Practice," Harmon said simply. "Lots of practice." A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. Analyst Carter entered with tablet in hand, his expression caught between excitement and confusion. "Ballistics analysis complete, sir. The shots—" He paused, glancing at Harmon. "They're impossible." "Explain," Montgomery ordered. Carter pulled up a 3-dimensional rendering of the drone flight paths, complete with wind vectors, altitude markers, and trajectory plots. "The targeting computer estimates that to hit these drones at that range with that wind at those speeds, it would require predictive accuracy that exceeds human capability. The shooter would need to anticipate movement patterns that hadn't occurred yet." "Perhaps your computers need recalibration," Harmon suggested mildly. Carter shook his head. "I ran the calculations 6 different ways. The margin of error is negligible. Those shots shouldn't have been possible." Marcus studied the projections' mathematical confirmation of what he'd witnessed firsthand. Harmon hadn't just made difficult shots. He'd made shots that science said couldn't be made. "I want that analysis classified," Montgomery ordered. "Top-level security clearance only." "Sir, this kind of data could revolutionize our understanding of human performance limitations." "Classified," Montgomery repeated firmly. "No distribution, no copies, no discussion with unauthorized personnel." Carter nodded reluctantly and began implementing security protocols. The door opened again without a knock. Everyone in the room turned to see 3 figures enter with the casual confidence of people accustomed to unquestioned authority. 2 wore military uniforms devoid of unit insignia or identifying patches. The third, a woman in her late 40s, wore civilian clothes that nonetheless conveyed federal authority. She scanned the room, her gaze settling on Harmon with laser focus. "Everyone out," she said quietly, "except Captain Stone and Mr. Harmon." Montgomery straightened, bureaucratic territory threatened. "Ma'am, this is my command and I need to." The woman produced an identification card that made Montgomery's words die in his throat. "Special Agent Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. This situation has been elevated beyond your clearance level, Colonel." Montgomery glanced at Harmon, then back at Chen, weighing career preservation against protocol. "Career 1. Clear the room," he ordered. Rivera, Carter, and the others filed out, leaving only Chen, her 2 military escorts, Marcus and Harmon. The door closed with a heavy click. "Security sweep." Chen nodded to her companions, who immediately produced electronic devices that swept the room for surveillance equipment. "Room is clean," one reported after a thorough check. Chen pulled a device from her bag, setting it on the table. A small light pulsed green, creating an electronic countermeasure field against eavesdropping. Only then did she turn her full attention to Harmon. "Agent Eagle, 17, she said, the designation sending shockwaves through Marcus' operational status report. Harmon straightened imperceptibly, his demeanor shifting from elderly visitor to something entirely more focused. "Agent Eagle, 17, Task Force Dust Veil," he responded with formal precision. "Currently operational under independent deployment protocols. Mission duration 3 years, 4 months, 18 days since last official contact." The precision of his answer suggested someone who had been counting every day of isolation. Chen made notes on a tablet, while her military companions observed with professional intensity. "Mission parameters," she asked. Harmon paused, considering how much classified information he could reveal in the presence of personnel whose clearance levels remained unclear. Threat assessment and neutralization in advance of potential regional destabilization. Targets set included arms dealers, terrorist facilitators, and state actors engaging in activities contrary to U.S. national security interests. The clinical language couldn't quite conceal the scope of what he'd been doing. Single operator missions against threats that normally required entire special operations teams. Mission status. Primary objectives achieved, secondary objectives ongoing. Tertiary threats identified and under surveillance. Chen exchanged glances with her companions. Agent Eagle, 17, your operational independence has exceeded normal parameters for deep cover assignments. Assessment of psychological fitness for continued deployment. It was the crucial question because operatives who'd been isolated for extended periods sometimes developed psychological conditions that made them unsuitable for further missions. Harmon's response was immediate and precise. Operational effectiveness maintained, mission focus stable, psychological resilience within acceptable parameters for continued deployment. Physical condition. Minor injuries sustained during recent engagement. Fully operational within 12 hours. The military officer to Chen's left leaned forward with expression of professional curiosity. Agent Eagle, 17, yesterday's engagement at this base. Was that related to your ongoing mission? Harmon was quiet for several seconds, considering how to frame his response. Partially. The electronic warfare attack was conducted by assets connected to my target set. My intervention was both defensive and intelligence gathering. The revelation that yesterday's attack was connected to his 3-year mission sent electricity through the room because it meant the sophisticated assault on their base had been a side effect of much larger operations. Intelligence gathered. Confirmation of technological capabilities, operational methods, and target priorities. The attacking force was testing defensive measures in preparation for larger operations. Chen's expression tightened. What kind of larger operations? Coordinated attacks against multiple military installations. The goal is to identify vulnerabilities that can be exploited during periods of political instability. The scope of the threat was staggering. If hostile forces were conducting systematic testing of U.S. military bases, if they were preparing for coordinated attacks. Immediate threat assessment. Imminent, Harmon replied. Timeline measured in weeks rather than months. The military officer stood abruptly. Agent Chen, I need to contact command immediately. This intelligence requires immediate distribution to all relevant installations. Harmon raised a hand that stopped him mid-stride. Colonel, that intelligence distribution would compromise ongoing operations and alert hostile forces that their testing has been detected. Agent Eagle 17, we can't allow multiple bases to remain vulnerable to attack. The bases aren't vulnerable, Colonel, Harmon said evenly. They're bait. The word bait hung in the air like smoke from burning electronics. Chen leaned forward with expression of intense professional interest. Explain. Harmon's voice remained carefully neutral, but Marcus detected undertones of satisfaction that suggested he'd been planning this conversation for months. For 3 years, I've been tracking a network of hostile operatives who've been conducting reconnaissance against U.S. military installations. Yesterday's attack was the culmination of that reconnaissance, a final test before launching coordinated strikes. And you allowed it to proceed. I ensured it would fail in a way that provided maximum intelligence while revealing minimum capabilities. The elegant complexity of it was almost artistic. Harmon had allowed yesterday's attack to proceed because failure would provide more valuable intelligence than prevention. The attackers had revealed their technological capabilities, operational methods, and target priorities while achieving none of their objectives. Agent Eagle 17, that strategy placed base personnel at significant risk. Colonel, my intervention ensured 0 casualties while gathering intelligence that will prevent much larger attacks. The risk calculation was acceptable. Chen was making rapid notes while her companions exchanged glances that suggested they were processing implications beyond Marcus' clearance level. Agent Eagle 17, you're describing a complex counterintelligence operation conducted independently over 3 years. Authorization for such operations typically requires approval from the highest levels of government. Harmon's expression remained carefully neutral. Agent Chen, some operations are authorized at levels that don't appear on standard organizational charts. The implication was clear. Harmon's missions had been approved by someone with authority that transcended normal military hierarchy. Someone who operated in the spaces between official government and classified operations. Who authorized your mission? The second military officer asked. Someone with sufficient authority to make that decision. It was a non-answer that revealed nothing while confirming everything. Chen understood that pressing for more specific information would only produce more deflections. Agent Eagle 17 current mission status requires immediate debriefing at the highest classification levels. Transport will be arranged to appropriate facilities. Agent Chen, Harmon said firmly, my mission isn't complete. The flat statement sent ripples of tension through the room. If Harmon refused extraction, if he insisted on continuing independent operations, intelligence gathered yesterday confirmed the location of the network's command structure. Neutralizing that structure requires immediate action before they relocate in response to yesterday's failure. Chen was quiet for several seconds, processing the implications of what Harmon was proposing. Agent Eagle 17, you're requesting authorization for immediate offensive operations against hostile command structure. I'm informing you that such operations will proceed regardless of authorization, Harmon replied calmly. The question is whether they proceed with official support or independent execution. The threat was diplomatically phrased but unmistakable. Harmon would complete his mission with or without official approval. Chen could either provide support or watch from the sidelines. Agent Eagle 17, the risks of independent offensive operations are significantly lower than the risks of allowing hostile command structure to relocate and continue operations, Harmon finished for her. The military officer who had been silent until now leaned forward with expression of professional respect. Agent Eagle 17, where do you need? The question bypassed bureaucratic protocols and went directly to practical requirements. Harmon responded with the same directness. Transportation to target location, communication support during engagement, extraction if mission parameters change, standard support package for independent operator. Timeline. Optimal window opens in 6 hours, closes in 18. Chen looked toward her colleagues engaging in rapid nonverbal communication that spoke of decisions being made at levels beyond Marcus's understanding. Agent Eagle 17 authorization pending confirmation from Command Authority. Prepare for immediate deployment. Harmon nodded at acceptance, but his expression suggested he'd prepared for immediate deployment regardless of official authorization. Agent Chen, I'll need to speak with Captain Stone privately before departure. Chen hesitated, clearly unwilling to allow unsupervised conversation with someone who was about to undertake operations that existed beyond normal oversight. Agent Eagle 17 operational security. Captain Stone will be providing support for this operation, Harmon interrupted with quiet authority. He needs to understand parameters that can't be discussed in official briefings. Marcus felt electricity shoot through his nervous system. Support for operations that existed beyond normal classification levels meant exposure to information that could fundamentally change his understanding of military service. Captain Stone doesn't have clearance for... He does now, the senior military officer interjected. You've just been read into operations that don't officially exist, Captain. Your clearance level is now whatever Agent Eagle 17 says it is. The casual redefinition of his security access sent Marcus's world tilting sideways, because if his clearance level was determined by operational necessity rather than bureaucratic approval, then he was about to learn things that couldn't be unlearned. Chen gestured towards a smaller briefing room adjacent to the main command center. 5 minutes, minimum supervision. Harmon led Marcus into the adjoining space. The absence of electronic countermeasures created an atmosphere that felt almost intimate compared to the high-security environment they just left. Marcus, Harmon said quietly once the door closed behind them, what I'm about to tell you will change how you understand military service. How? Because you're going to learn that some battles are fought by people who officially don't exist against enemies, who officially aren't threats using methods that officially never happened. Marcus felt the careful foundation of his worldview beginning to crack. Why are you telling me this? Because I need a spotter. The simple statement hit him like physical impact. After 3 years of independent operations, after conducting solo missions that normally required entire teams, Harmon was asking for partnership. For tonight's mission, for whatever comes after tonight's mission. The implication was staggering. If Harmon was offering long-term partnership in operations that existed beyond normal military structure, I have duties here. Responsibilities to my unit, my base, my commanding officer. Marcus Harmon's voice carried gentle finality. After tonight, those responsibilities will seem quaint compared to what we'll be doing. Before Marcus could respond, Harmon was moving toward the door. Their private conversation, like all their interactions, had been measured in minutes rather than hours. Wait, Marcus called after him. I need to understand. Harmon paused at the threshold, pale blue eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that belied his age. You'll understand everything you need to understand. He hesitated, then added, "And Marcus, when things get impossible tonight, remember? That impossible is just another word for Tuesday in our line of work." Back in the main briefing room, Chen and her team had received authorization that apparently exceeded their expectations. Electronic equipment was being packed with urgent efficiency, while personnel made preparations for operations that required maximum mobility. Agent Eagle 17, Chen announced. Full authorization confirmed. All requested support approved. Transport standing by. Harmon nodded acknowledgement, but his attention had shifted to Marcus, with expression that suggested he was assessing his readiness for operations that would challenge everything he thought he knew about military service. Captain Stone's standard deployment protocol. Light equipment, minimum signature, maximum flexibility. Marcus felt like he was being conscripted into a parallel military that operated by rules he didn't understand. But looking at Harmon's ice blue eyes, he understood that refusing wasn't really an option. Your equipment is already being loaded onto transport, the senior military officer informed them, including specialized items that aren't standard issue. The revelation that his equipment was being prepared without his knowledge suggested planning that extended far beyond spontaneous decisions. Someone had been preparing for this moment, anticipating that Marcus would be needed for operations that required his specific skills. 20 minutes later, they stood on the helicopter pad as a sleek black aircraft with no military markings settled onto the tarmac. The rotors spun with a whisper rather than the thunder of standard military helicopters, evidence of advanced technology designed for covert operations. As they prepared to board, Rivera approached his earlier mockery replaced by awkward respect. "Captain," he said to Marcus, "good luck with—" He gestured vaguely, "whatever this is." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken questions Rivera couldn't ask. Private Williams stood nearby, watching the proceedings with the wide-eyed expression of someone witnessing something he knew was significant, but couldn't fully understand. Sir Williams addressed Harmon, directly offering his hand. It was an honor. Harmon shook it with a grip that belied his apparent age. "The honor is mine, Private Williams. Remember what I said." "This never happened," Williams replied with a nod. "Good man." As they boarded the aircraft, Marcus noticed Montgomery watching from the command post window. His expression caught between relief at the departure of a problem and concern about the implications of what he'd witnessed. The helicopter lifted off with barely a vibration, evidence of engineering that existed far beyond standard military aviation. Inside, the cabin was configured for maximum tactical efficiency. Communication systems, weapon stations, and medical equipment arranged for optimal access during high-stress operations. The two military officers who had accompanied Chen were already aboard, their demeanor shifting from administrative to operational as the aircraft gained altitude. Agent Eagle 17, the senior officer, extended his hand. "Colonel James Morrison, Task Force Spectre. This is Major Williams. We'll be your operational support for this mission." Harmon shook their hands with professional courtesy. "Colonel, Major." "Captain Stone," Morrison turned to Marcus. "Welcome to the Ghost World." Marcus accepted the handshake, the phrase Ghost World, sending chills through his system. In special operations terminology, ghosts were operatives who officially didn't exist conducting missions that officially never happened. "Thank you, sir, though I'm still not entirely clear on what this mission entails." "Agent Eagle 17 will brief you," Morrison replied. "My team is here to provide logistical support and extraction if necessary. We don't interfere with operational decisions." The deferential tone from a full colonel toward Harmon reinforced the growing realization that whatever organization Harmon belonged to, it existed well above normal military hierarchy. As the helicopter banked toward the east, Harmon settled into one of the tactical seats and gestured for Marcus to join him. A holographic display activated between them, showing satellite imagery of a compound located in what appeared to be mountainous desert terrain. "Syria," Harmon said, answering the unspoken question. "Specifically a region near the Turkish border that technically doesn't appear on any map." "What's the target?" "Not what, who." Harmon manipulated the holographic controls with practiced ease, zooming in on a collection of buildings surrounded by minimal security infrastructure. The image resolution was far beyond anything Marcus had seen in standard military briefings. 5 individuals are scheduled to meet at this location in approximately 4 hours. Their names are Jonathan Ho, Maria Santos, David Kim, Sarah Wilson, and Michael Johnson. Military targets. "Civilians," Harmon replied, with more blood on their hands than most military dictators. He pulled up dossiers on each individual. The files contained photographs, biographical data, and activity timelines that stretched back years. Jonathan Hayes, arms dealer, specializing in surface-to-air missiles. responsible for supplying weapons that have been used to shoot down 3 medical evacuation helicopters in the last 18 months. The image showed a middle-aged man with the polished appearance of a successful businessman. Maria Santos, military contractor, coordinating reconstruction projects that require continued destruction. Her company has rebuilt the same bridge 7 times, each reconstruction contract worth $20 million. Santos appeared to be in her early 40s, with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms rather than battlefields. David Kim, intelligence broker, selling targeting information to multiple factions, ensuring that civilian infrastructure remains in the crosshairs. Kim was younger, his expression carrying the detached calculation of someone who viewed human suffering as an abstraction. Sarah Wilson, logistics coordinator, managing weapons shipments to all sides of the conflict, maintaining perfect balance to ensure maximum casualties and prolonged fighting. Wilson could have been anyone's neighbor, her unremarkable appearance belying her role in widespread destruction. Michael Johnson, financial facilitator, ensuring payment systems that benefit from prolonged instability, laundering money through humanitarian aid organizations. Johnson looked like a university professor, complete with glasses and scholarly demeanor. These 5 people, Harmon concluded, have coordinated activities that have resulted in over 40,000 civilian deaths in the past 18 months. Their meeting tonight is to plan operations that will kill 40,000 more. Marcus studied the faces, trying to reconcile their ordinary appearances with the extraordinary evil Harmon described. What's the mission objective? Neutralization of all targets and collection of evidence that will prevent others from continuing their operations. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality. This was an assassination mission combined with intelligence gathering. 5 people would die tonight. These are American citizens, Marcus noted, seeing the passport information in the dossiers. We're tasking a military operation against American civilians. This isn't a military operation, Harmon corrected, and I'm not military, not anymore. This is prevention of mass casualties by removing the architects of systemic violence. The legal framework is, he paused, searching for the right words, flexible. Flexible, Marcus repeated flatly. When people make decisions that kill tens of thousands for profit, the normal rules of engagement become philosophical rather than practical. Marcus couldn't argue with the logic, even as he recognized how far it strayed from standard military doctrine. But then nothing about this situation was standard. What do you need from me? What you've always done. Observation wind calculation, target confirmation, perimeter security. We'll be positioned approximately 1,800 meters from the target, requiring compensation for elevation, wind variance, and earth curvature. Marcus processed the tactical requirements. 1,800 meters was beyond the effective range of most snipers, even with optimal conditions and stationary targets. Sir, that's challenging, Harmon acknowledged, but we've made more difficult shots. Remember Operation Sandstorm, 820 meters with a 15-knot crosswind, using decade-old ammunition? That was different. You were in your prime then. A ghost of a smile crossed Harmon's face. Define prime, Captain. Before Marcus could respond, Major Williams interrupted. Agent Eagle 17, we have incoming communication from command. Eyes only. Harmon moved to the secure communication station, leaving Marcus to contemplate what he'd agreed to. He was about to participate in an operation that existed beyond any legal framework he recognized, targeting American citizens without trial or due process, all on the word of a man who had been officially dead for 3 years. The rational part of his brain screamed warning. The soldier in him, the part that had witnessed Harmon's impossible shots and recognized the truth in his eyes, accepted that some threats required extraordinary responses. Harmon returned minutes later, his expression grim. Change of plans. Our targets have moved up their meeting. New timeline puts them at the location in 90 minutes. That cuts our preparation time significantly, Colonel Morrison noted. Unavoidable, Harmon replied. Pilot maximum sustainable speed to the drop zone. The aircraft banked sharply, accelerating to speeds Marcus hadn't thought possible for rotary wing aircraft. The landscape below blurred as they raced against time. Marcus turned back to the holographic display, studying the terrain surrounding their target. The compound was nestled in a small valley with high ground to the north, offering optimal shooting position. The challenge would be reaching that position undetected. What's our infiltration plan? High altitude drop 5 kilometers from the target, then ground approach through these ravines. Harmon traced a path through the holographic terrain. The ridge here provides adequate coverage and clear lines of fire to all meeting participants. Marcus studied the approach, noting potential problems. That puts the sun at our backs during the operation. Good for visibility, bad for concealment. Correct, Harmon agreed. We'll need to establish position before full daylight and remain absolutely still until the meeting commences. The tactical discussion continued as the helicopter sped toward the Syrian border, each man falling into the familiar patterns of mission planning that transcended their extraordinary circumstances. An hour into the flight, as they passed over the Mediterranean, Harmon excused himself to prepare his equipment. When he returned, Marcus barely recognized him. Gone was any hint of age or infirmity. His movements were fluid and precise, his bearing that of a man in his physical prime rather than his ninth decade. More shocking was the shoulder that had been bleeding earlier. As Harmon checked his tactical gear, the bandage was gone, replaced by what appeared to be perfectly healthy tissue. Your wound. Harmon glanced at his shoulder, then back at Marcus with a slight shrug. Accelerated healing. One of the benefits of the program. What program? That's a conversation for after the mission, Captain. Marcus wanted to press the issue, but the aircraft was beginning its descent toward the drop zone and operational concerns took precedence over mysteries. 2 minutes to drop point, the pilot announced over the intercom. Colonel Morrison approached, offering final confirmation. Agent Eagle 17 Command has authorized full-spectrum operations. You have complete discretion on execution and evidence collection. Extraction team will remain on station at Rally Point Alpha. Understood, Colonel. Standard communication protocols emergency extraction signal if compromised. Good hunting. Morrison said the traditional special operations farewell carrying extra weight under the circumstances. Harmon turned to Marcus, his ice blue eyes now focused with predatory intensity. Last chance to back out, Captain. Once we drop, we're committed. Marcus checked his equipment, one final time the familiar routine of preparing for a mission, providing anchor against the surreal nature of the situation. I'm committed, he replied. Then with a slight smile, though I still have questions. We all do, Harmon said quietly. The difference is knowing which ones matter. 30 seconds, the pilot called. The aircraft hovered 10 feet above the rocky terrain rotors, stirring minimum dust to avoid detection. The side door slid open, revealing a moonlit landscape of harsh beauty and potential danger. Harmon paused at the threshold, turning back to Marcus. In the red glow of the cabin lights, his features seemed younger somehow, as if the mission had stripped away years of careful disguise. By the way, he said casually, adjusting his tactical vest, I'm actually 93, not 87. Before Marcus could process this revelation, Harmon was out the door, moving with the graceful efficiency of a man one-third his claimed age. Marcus followed, questions multiplying with every step. They moved silently across the rocky terrain, each step precisely placed to minimize noise and disturbance. The weight of their mission settled between them like a physical presence, guiding their movements and sharpening their senses. As they approached the ridge that would serve as their firing position, Marcus noticed something unusual about Harmon's tactical gear. Where standard operators carried multiple ammunition types, communications equipment, and survival supplies, Harmon's kit was stripped down to the absolute minimum. No spare magazines, no emergency rations, nothing but the essentials for the immediate mission. He moved like a ghost, each motion so economical it seemed choreographed. Not the movement of an elderly man pretending to be younger, but something else entirely. Something Marcus had never seen before, even among the most elite operators. Sir, he whispered as they settled into their observation position, overlooking the compound, what exactly happened to you after Fallujah? Harmon finished setting up his rifle before answering the practiced motions of a ritual performed thousands of times. I died, he said simply, and then I was reborn as something else. What does that mean? Harmon adjusted his scope, checking sight lines to the compound below, where lights had begun to illuminate the approaching darkness. It means Captain Stone that some missions require more than humanity can give, so we become something else to complete them. The enigmatic answer raised more questions than it answered, but Marcus sensed that further inquiry would be futile. Harmon was focused now, his entire being narrowed to the mission before them. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley as they settled in for the wait. Below them, vehicles began to arrive at the compound. Security personnel establishing perimeter positions that would be useless against the threat positioned 1,800 meters away and 340 meters above them. First target arriving, Harmon murmured, his eye never leaving the scope. Marcus adjusted his observation equipment, focusing on the approaching vehicles. Confirmed. 2 SUVs lead vehicle has 4 armed security. Second has our first target, Jonathan Hayes. Harmon made minute adjustments to his rifle, compensating for wind temperature and the cooling evening air that would affect ballistics. What changed you? Marcus couldn't help asking as they settled in for the operation. Harmon was silent for so long, Marcus thought he'd decided not to answer. Then almost too quiet to hear. Necessity, duty. The understanding that some enemies can only be fought from the shadows by those willing to sacrifice everything, including their humanity. You seem pretty human to me. Harmon smiled slightly, the expression barely visible in the gathering darkness. Appearances can be deceiving, Captain, much like death. Below them, more vehicles arrived, disgorging their passengers into the compound. The meeting that would decide the fate of thousands was about to begin, unaware of the judgment positioned on the ridge above. All targets confirmed on site, Marcus reported. Meeting appears to be commencing in the central building. Optimal firing position in 4 minutes, Harmon replied, checking his watch. When we begin, we'll have exactly 18 seconds before security responds. 5 shots, 5 targets, then immediate extraction to the ravine. Marcus nodded, falling into the familiar rhythm of mission execution. Whatever mysteries surrounded Harmon, whatever impossible truths waited to be revealed, the immediate task was clear. 5 people who had orchestrated mass death for profit were about to meet justice from an unexpected quarter. Wind holding steady at 8 knots from the northwest, Marcus reported. Temperature dropping approximately 1 degree per hour. Humidity at 20% and stable. Calculating final adjustments, Harmon confirmed. First shot on my mark. The night settled around them, stars emerging in a sky untouched by light pollution. In the distance, a coyote howled the sound carrying across the empty landscape like a harbinger. Second and third targets now visible through eastern window, Marcus updated. All 5 confirmed in the main room. Ready. Harmon breathed, his body perfectly still, save for the steady rhythm of his controlled breathing. Whenever you are, Marcus confirmed, settling into his role as spotter with practiced ease. In the silence that followed as Harmon prepared to deliver justice from 1,800 meters, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what he'd committed himself to. Not just this mission, but what came after. The ghost world that Colonel Morrison had mentioned. The shadowy realm where officially dead operatives fought enemies that officially didn't exist, using methods that officially never happened. He was about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. His life as he knew it would end tonight, replaced by something else. Something defined by secrets and shadows rather than the clear chain of command he'd built his career upon. By the way, Harmon said quietly, eye still fixed to his scope finger poised above the trigger. There's something you should know before we do this. What's that? Once you step into this world, there's no going back. Your old life, your identity, everything you thought you were, it becomes a memory. Are you prepared for that? Marcus considered the question, weighing the comfortable certainties of his military career against the unknown path Harmon offered. A path of secrets and shadows of battles fought beyond the knowledge of those they protected. Yes, he said finally, I'm prepared. Harmon nodded, once accepting the commitment for what it was. Then let's begin. Night settled over the Syrian mountains like a velvet cloak, stars emerging in a display of brilliance unknown to those who lived beneath city lights. In the ravines below, jackals called to one another, their voices carrying across the empty landscape. The compound stood illuminated against the darkness, security lights creating a false sense of protection for those within. Edwin Harmon lay motionless on the ridge, his body melded with the earth beneath him. Beside him, Marcus Stone maintained observation through high-powered optics, their breathing synchronized by years of shared experience, interrupted by death and deception. Wind shift. 2 knots from the east now, Marcus murmured, voice barely audible even in the silence. Harmon made a minute adjustment to his scope fingers, moving with precision that belied his age. The Barrett M82A1 rifle before him was positioned on a lightweight carbon fiber bipod, its long barrel seeming to disappear into the darkness beyond. Range to primary target, Harmon asked. 1,812 meters to haze. Secondary targets positioned within 4-meter radius. Through his scope, Harmon could see the 5 figures in the central building. They sat around a conference table, spread with maps and documents, their faces illuminated by overhead lighting that made them perfect targets despite the extreme distance. What are they planning? Marcus wondered aloud as he observed the meeting through his spotting scope. The extension of human suffering, Harmon replied, his voice emotionless. Each death converts to profit in their spreadsheets. Each orphan child becomes a statistical footnote in quarterly earnings reports. The coldness in his tone sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the night air. You've been hunting them for 3 years. These 5 and others like them, Harmon confirmed, the architects of engineered conflict. People who ensure wars never end because peace isn't profitable. Below them, Jonathan Hayes stood to address the group, pointing to locations on a map spread before them. Through image enhancement technology, Marcus could see the man's expression clearly, despite the distance, the casual confidence of someone discussing business strategy rather than operations that would kill thousands. Hayes is outlining strike zones, Marcus reported. Civilian areas, schools, markets. Increased civilian casualties create refugee movements, Harmon explained. Refugee movements require international aid. International aid creates opportunities for skimming billions in reconstruction contracts. And no one stops them. Someone is about to. Harmon's finger hovered near the trigger guard, not yet in firing position, but prepared to move in microseconds. His breathing slowed further, dropping to just 4 breaths per minute, a technique Marcus had only read about in classified physiological control studies. "You never told me what happened after Fallujah," Marcus said quietly, maintaining his observation of the targets. "How you survived, what they did to you." Harmon was silent for a long moment, his focus unwavering from the scope before him. "I was recruited," he finally said, "after the explosion while I was still in the field hospital. A program so classified even the people who authorized it don't know its full parameters." "What kind of program?" "One that creates ghosts. Operatives who can move through the world undetected, who can endure conditions that would kill ordinary people, who can complete missions that conventional forces can't touch for political reasons." "How many of you are there?" "At one time, 12. Now, as far as I know, only 3 remain operational." The implications were staggering. A force of operatives operating completely outside normal command structure, conducting missions so sensitive they required official death as a prerequisite. The accelerated healing, the precision beyond human capability. "What did they do to you?" Harmon's eyes never left his scope as he answered. "Advanced cellular modification, neural pathway enhancement, physiological optimization beyond normal human limits." His voice remained clinical, detached. "The procedures were unpleasant." The understatement hung in the air between them. Marcus could only imagine what unpleasant might encompass in a program so secret it required its participants to be officially dead. "Worth it?" he asked. "Ask me when we're done tonight." Below them, the meeting continued, unaware of the judgment positioned on the ridge above. Maria Santos was speaking now, gesturing to financial projections displayed on a tablet. The casualness with which they discussed mass human suffering was more chilling than any expression of malice could have been. "First shot imminent," Harmon announced. "Targeting sequence Hayes Santos, Kim Wilson Johnson. Confirmed visual on all targets." Marcus adjusted his spotting scope, methodically verifying the identity and position of each target. "All targets confirmed. Clean sight lines to each. Security personnel positioned outside immediate target zone. Initiating in 3, 2, 1. Harmon's finger moved to the trigger, applying precise pressure with mathematical accuracy. The rifle discharged with a thunderous report that echoed across the valley. Through his scope, Marcus watched Jonathan Hayes collapse mid-sentence, the back of his skull disappearing in a spray of crimson. The chaos that erupted in the room was visible even at this distance, but Harmon had already cycled the bolt, with mechanical efficiency ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round. The second shot followed less than 3 seconds after the first. Maria Santos fell forward onto the table, documents blooming red beneath her. "Security responding," Marcus reported, watching men sprint toward the main building. "Vehicle movement at the eastern entrance." Harmon ignored the information, his world narrowed to the scope before him and the targets beyond. The third shot found David Kim as he attempted to reach the door, dropping him mid-stride. Sarah Wilson had taken cover beneath the conference table, but advanced thermal imaging rendered such concealment useless. The fourth shot passed through the wooden barrier as if it didn't exist, finding its mark with unerring precision. "Last target moving to secure room," Marcus reported. "Heavy door, reinforced walls." "Calculating structural penetration," Harmon replied, making minute adjustments to his scope. The fifth shot seemed to defy physics, passing through a narrow window at an angle that should have been impossible, changing trajectory in ways that ballistic science said couldn't happen. Inside the secure room, Michael Johnson collapsed against a wall safe he had been frantically attempting to open. "All targets neutralized," Marcus confirmed, his voice steady despite the enormity of what they had just accomplished. 5 shots, 5 kills, at a range that exceeded the effective limits of the weapon they were using. "Initiate Phase 2, Harmon ordered, already breaking down his rifle with practiced efficiency. "We have 12 minutes to reach the compound, retrieve the evidence, and exit before regional security forces respond." They moved like shadows down the rocky slope, their progress swift and silent. What should have taken 30 minutes they covered in less than 10, reaching the perimeter of the compound, just as the first security teams were establishing defensive positions. Security protocol standard, Marcus asked as they paused behind a rock outcropping 300 meters from the entrance. Eastern European contractors, ex-military, well-paid but minimally invested in their principles. Harmon checked his sidearm, a custom weapon Marcus didn't recognize. They'll maintain perimeter security, but won't pursue aggressively once we're clear. Breach point, northern wall maintenance access, security cameras on 5-second delay loop. We'll have a blind spot at the junction of sectors 2 and 3. Marcus marveled at the detailed knowledge. Harmon had clearly been planning this operation for months, possibly years. On your go, he said, readying himself for close quarters combat. They moved during a momentary gap in the security patrols, reaching the northern wall unseen. Harmon produced a device that bypassed the electronic lock with disturbing ease, and they slipped inside the compound undetected. The interior was chaos, security personnel shouting orders, and medical staff attempting to confirm what was already evident to those in the room. All 5 targets were beyond help, their deaths instantaneous and clinically precise. Harmon led Marcus through service corridors and back passages, avoiding the main areas where security was concentrated. Their destination was a secure office at the rear of the compound, sealed with a biometric lock that should have been impenetrable. Problem, Marcus whispered, eyeing the fingerprint and retinal scanner. Harmon removed a small case from his tactical vest, opening it to reveal what appeared to be a thin film and a contact lens. Synthetic fingerprint matching, haze optical overlay matching his retinal pattern, he explained, applying the film to his thumb and the lens to his right eye, courtesy of advanced intelligence gathering over the past year. The door opened with a soft click, granting them access to the heart of the operation. Inside, electronic systems hummed servers processing data for operations that spanned continents. Screens displayed maps marked with targets, timelines, and casualty projections that confirmed everything Harmon had claimed about the network's activities. Evidence collection. Priority targets first. Harmon directed attaching a specialized drive to the main server. The device began downloading at speeds that shouldn't have been possible with current technology. Marcus moved to the physical files, photographing documents with a specialized camera that transmitted images directly to a secure server halfway across the world. Financial records, contact lists, operational plans, all documented with methodical precision. 4 minutes remaining in our window, he reminded Harmon, who was accessing a hidden safe revealed by thermal scanning. Acknowledged. The safe contained what appeared to be multiple passports, currency from various nations, and most importantly, a series of ledgers recording transactions too sensitive to be kept in digital form. Harmon photographed each page, then removed several flash drives secured in a lead-lined case. Primary objective secured, he announced. Initiate exit protocol. They retraced their steps through the compound, the security team still focused on the main building and the bodies within. Outside vehicle engines roared as additional forces arrived, but Harmon led them through a drainage culvert that bypassed the main security checkpoint. Once clear of the immediate perimeter, they moved at a pace Marcus would have thought impossible for a man of Harmon's claimed age. They traversed terrain that would challenge men a quarter of his age, ascending rocky slopes and crossing ravines with fluid precision. Extraction point 2 kilometers ahead, Harmon noted, showing no signs of fatigue despite the pace and the difficult terrain. Helicopter will hold for 3 minutes only. They reached the extraction point with 40 seconds to spare, the black helicopter appearing over the ridge like a phantom. It touched down just long enough for them to board before lifting off again, its engines surprisingly quiet for the speed it achieved. Inside, Colonel Morrison waited, his expression grim but satisfied. Confirmation, he asked. All targets neutralized, Harmon reported. Primary intelligence secured. Evidence of operations spanning 27 countries implicating government officials in 12 nations. Morrison nodded, processing the implications. Transmission of evidence has already begun. Analysts are processing the data now. He handed Harmon a secure tablet. Initial findings confirm your assessment. They were planning coordinated attacks designed to trigger a regional conflict that would have displaced approximately 2 million civilians. Marcus watched the exchange, struck by the calm discussion of operations that would reshape geopolitical realities. Lives saved through targeted elimination, wars prevented through carefully applied violence. It was a calculus of morality that existed far beyond conventional military ethics. What happens to the evidence, he asked. Selective dissemination, Morrison explained. financial records to international prosecutors, operational plans to targeted intelligence agencies, enough to dismantle the network without revealing the full extent of our knowledge. And no one ever knows what really happened tonight, Marcus observed. The official report will attribute the deaths to rival faction infighting, Harmon confirmed. Another tragedy in a region known for violence. No one looks too deeply at 5 fewer criminals in a war zone. The helicopter banked sharply heading west toward friendly airspace. Below them, the Syrian desert stretched into darkness, the compound already fading from view. In less than an hour, they had changed the course of regional politics and saved countless lives, yet the world would never know. As the adrenaline of the mission began to fade, Marcus turned his attention back to Harmon. The older man sat reviewing the intelligence they had gathered, his posture betraying none of the fatigue that should have followed such exertion. "You said there were 3 of you left," Marcus said quietly. 3 ghosts still operational. Where are the others? Harmon looked up from the tablet, his ice-blue eyes unreadable in the dim light of the helicopter cabin. "Conducting similar operations in other parts of the world, places where conventional forces can't go against enemies who think themselves untouchable. And when this is over, when the missions end," a ghost of a smile crossed Harmon's face. "The missions never end, Marcus. There are always more architects of suffering, more profiteers of human misery. We continue until we can't. And then we fade away. No ceremonies, no recognition. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing what we prevented." The answer carried a weight of loneliness that Marcus hadn't anticipated. To live in the shadows, to save lives that would never know they'd been saved, to fight battles that would never be recorded in history books. It was a form of service beyond anything he'd considered possible. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Why reveal yourself now after 3 years? Why bring me into this world?" Harmon set aside the tablet, giving Marcus his full attention. "Because even ghosts need human connection, Captain. 3 years of complete isolation takes a toll that even enhanced physiology can't prevent. I needed someone who understood the necessity of what we do, someone with the skills to complement my own, someone I could trust with the truth. And the timing, why now? Because the program is changing, evolving. The next generation of operatives won't undergo the physical modifications that mine did. They'll need different skills, different support structures." Harmon leaned forward slightly. "They'll need teachers who understand both worlds, the conventional military and the shadow operations." The implication was clear. Harmon wasn't just recruiting Marcus for a single mission or even a series of operations. He was offering a transition, a pathway into a realm of service few even knew existed. "Is that what you're offering me, to become a ghost?" "Not exactly. You wouldn't undergo the physical modifications. Your death wouldn't be faked. You'd exist in the space between, officially assigned to a training unit that serves as cover for your real activities." Harmon paused. "You'd be the bridge, Marcus, the link between the ghosts and the living." The helicopter began its descent toward a secure facility located in northern Iraq, a temporary staging area before their return to American soil. As they prepared to disembark, Morrison approached with a secure phone. "Agent Eagle 17, priority communication from command." Harmon took the phone, listening intently for several minutes before responding with a series of coded acknowledgments. When he handed the phone back, his expression had shifted slightly, a new intensity evident in his gaze. "Change of plans," he informed Marcus. "We're not returning to Fort Bragg immediately. There's another situation developing that requires attention. Another mission, a training opportunity, something to help you decide if this is the path you want to take." They were escorted to a separate facility within the base, a nondescript building that could have been administrative offices but contained technology and equipment decades beyond what Marcus had seen even in the most advanced military installations. Inside, a briefing room awaited them. The walls displayed real-time intelligence feeds from locations across the globe, analysts working quietly at stations that monitored patterns of data most people would never comprehend. Agent Chen was waiting, her expression professionally neutral as they entered. "Agent Eagle 17, she acknowledged. "Captain Stone, the evidence you recovered is already yielding significant intelligence. Financial networks operating in 12 countries have been identified. Weapons shipments to 3 conflict zones have been interdicted." "Casualties prevented?" Harmon asked. "Conservative estimate places the number at approximately 30,000 over the next 6 months, Chen replied, Thoron. "Potentially over 100,000 in the longer term." Marcus absorbed this information with growing awareness of the scale of their operation. 5 lives taken to save 100,000. It was a mathematics of mortality that made conventional warfare seem wasteful by comparison. The secondary operation, Harmon inquired. Chen activated a holographic display showing a coastal facility located on the Mediterranean. Storage facility for weapons intended for distribution to multiple factions. Current inventory includes chemical components that could be weaponized for mass casualty events. Security minimal, primarily automated systems with limited human presence. Objective: intelligence gathering, primary neutralization of chemical components secondary. Non-lethal approach preferred for on-site personnel. Harmon studied the display, his mind already calculating approaches, security responses, and extraction routes. Timeline: 12-hour window beginning at 0600 local time, Chen replied. Support team limited to technical assets only. No additional field operators available within the necessary time frame. Understood. Harmon turned to Marcus. A somewhat simpler operation than tonight's. An opportunity to observe methodologies without the same level of moral complexity. I'm in, Marcus said without hesitation, surprising himself with the immediacy of his decision. Chen nodded, apparently unsurprised by his response. Equipment is being prepared. Briefing materials are available on secure tablets. Transport departs in 90 minutes. As Chen left to make final arrangements, Marcus and Harmon found themselves alone in the briefing room. The holographic display continued to rotate, showing various angles of their next target. You decided quickly, Harmon observed. Maybe I already knew the answer before you asked the question. Harmon smiled slightly, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost youthful. That's how it happens, Marcus. Not with grand epiphanies, but with the quiet recognition that you've already crossed a threshold without realizing it. When did you cross yours? Harmon's gaze turned distant, focused on memories decades old. Fallujah wasn't my first death, Captain, just the most recent. Before Marcus could press for clarification, Morrison returned with the secure tablets containing their mission briefing. The moment for personal revelation had passed, replaced by the immediate demands of operational planning. They spent the next hour reviewing intelligence, memorizing facility layouts, and preparing equipment specialized for the mission parameters. Throughout the process, Marcus observed Harmon's methodical approach, the way he anticipated complications and prepared contingencies with an efficiency born of decades of experience. As they prepared to board the transport, Marcus finally asked the question that had been forming since they left Syria. After all this time, after all you've seen and done, do you ever regret becoming what you are? Harmon paused in checking his equipment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Regret is a luxury for those who have choices, Captain. I made mine long ago when I accepted that some threats can only be confronted from the shadows. He secured the last of his gear before continuing. But if you're asking whether the price was worth paying, whether the lives saved justify the life I surrendered, that's a calculus each of us must make for ourselves. And your calculation, still ongoing, perhaps it always will be. Harmon shouldered his pack, ready to move toward the waiting aircraft. Ask me again when we're old men sitting on a porch somewhere, watching a world that never knew how close it came to burning. You're already an old man, Marcus pointed out with a slight smile. Appearances can be deceiving, Captain, as you're beginning to learn. They boarded the aircraft as dawn broke over the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the world continued its daily rhythms, people waking to lives that would continue because of actions taken in darkness, decisions made in shadows, sacrifices offered without recognition. Marcus settled into his seat, watching as Harmon reviewed mission parameters one final time. The man before him remained an enigma, wrapped in classified operations and physiological modifications beyond normal science. Yet in his dedication to a cause greater than himself, in his willingness to surrender identity and recognition for the chance to save lives that would never know they'd been saved, Marcus recognized a form of heroism more profound than any he'd encountered in conventional military service. What are you thinking, Captain? Harmon asked, noticing Marcus's scrutiny. I'm thinking about ghosts, Marcus replied. About the ones who haunt the spaces between official truth and necessary action. And I'm thinking I might be ready to become one. Harmon nodded, accepting the commitment with the gravity it deserved. The path isn't easy, Marcus. The victories are never celebrated. The losses weigh heavier because they can't be shared. He paused, pale blue eyes fixed on Marcus with unnerving intensity. But the knowledge that you prevented suffering on a scale most people can't comprehend, there's a peace in that, a purpose that transcends conventional service. The aircraft lifted off, banking toward their next mission, their next intervention in the shadowy war that raged beneath the surface of official conflicts. As they flew west toward the Mediterranean, Harmon removed a worn compass from his pocket, the same one he had consulted at Fort Bragg, what seemed a lifetime ago. "My father gave me this before I shipped out to Korea," he said, turning the instrument in his weathered hands. "Told me that no matter how lost I might feel, this would always point me toward home." "Did it work?" Marcus asked. "Not in the way he meant," Harmon admitted, "but it reminded me that direction matters more than destination. That moving purposefully through darkness is better than standing still in false light." He handed the compass to Marcus, the metal warm from his grip. "What's this for?" "For when you need to remember why we do what we do. For when the shadows grow too deep and the cost seems too high." Marcus accepted the gift, understanding its significance beyond the physical object. It was a talisman, a connection to a lineage of service that existed outside official recognition. "I'll return it when we're done," he promised. "Keep it," Harmon replied. "I found my direction. Now you need to find yours." As the sun climbed higher in the eastern sky, casting long shadows across the landscape below, the aircraft carried them toward a future defined by necessary secrets and invisible victories. Behind them, the lives they had lived dissolved like morning mist, replaced by the crystalline clarity of purpose that came from knowing their actions would save thousands who would never know they had been in danger. In the space between official history and classified truth, two men moved toward a destiny that would never appear in any record, but would change everything. The dead, after all, had very long reach indeed. 6 months later, Marcus stood on a ridge overlooking the training grounds at Fort Bragg. Below him, Delta Force operators ran drills under Rivera's watchful eye. They moved with precision born of endless practice, yet Marcus could see flaws in their approach, vulnerabilities in their tactics that would prove fatal in the field. "They're improving," Harmon observed, appearing beside him with the silent movement that had once startled Marcus but now seemed normal. "Rivera has potential as an instructor. He still relies too heavily on technology," Marcus noted. "Puts too much faith in systems that can fail at critical moments. A common failing in modern warfare, one you're uniquely positioned to correct." In the months since Syria, Marcus had officially transferred to a specialized training unit focused on unconventional warfare techniques. Unofficially, he had participated in 4 operations that existed beyond any conventional authorization, preventing threats that most of the military hierarchy never knew existed. "The new assignment comes through next week," Harmon said. "Special tactics instructor assigned to rotate between SEAL Delta and Ranger training programs. The perfect cover for your other activities." "And you?" Marcus asked. "Where will you be?" Harmon's gaze swept the horizon, taking in the landscape with the practiced assessment of someone who had spent a lifetime identifying threats and opportunities. "Where I'm needed? Sometimes nearby, sometimes not, but never far." A companionable silence settled between them, two men bound by secrets that could never be shared and missions that could never be acknowledged. "Was it worth it?" Marcus asked, finally returning to the question he had posed 6 months earlier. "Everything you sacrificed, everything you became, was it worth it?" Harmon considered the question, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "Last week, a refugee camp in northern Syria received its first medical supplies in 6 months," he said quietly. 3,000 children vaccinated against diseases that would have claimed hundreds of lives. Food distribution stabilized for the first time since the conflict began. All because 5 people who profited from their suffering are no longer able to disrupt aid deliveries. He turned to Marcus, the setting sun casting his weathered face in golden light. "Worth is measured differently in our world, Captain. Not in medals or recognition, not in promotions or parades. It's measured in lives that continue without interruption, in children who grow up never knowing how close they came to becoming statistics." "And that's enough," Marcus pressed. "It has to be," Harmon replied simply, "because it's all we get." As darkness began to claim the landscape, they turned away from the training grounds and walked toward the nondescript vehicle that would carry them to their next mission, their next intervention in the endless shadow war that raged beneath the surface of official conflicts. "By the way," Harmon said as they drove away from Fort Bragg, "Agent Chen approved your request for partnership protocol. You'll be assigned to my operational theater for the next 18 months. "Partners again," Marcus observed, "as we were always meant to be." The road stretched before them, leading away from the structured certainty of military hierarchy toward a world defined by necessary actions and invisible victories. Behind them, Fort Bragg continued its daily routines, training soldiers for wars that would be fought in the open, documented in history books, commemorated with medals and monuments. Ahead lay a different kind of service, a different kind of war. One fought by ghosts against enemies who believed themselves beyond reach using methods that officially didn't exist to save lives that would never know they had been in danger. And in the quiet space between them, a shared understanding that sometimes the greatest service was rendered in shadows by those willing to surrender recognition for the chance to protect what mattered most. The dead, after all, had very long reach indeed.